welcome Travis, and I'll ask him to do the roll call.
All right. Schissel? Here. Neal?
Here.
Carlson?
Here.
Luce?
Here.
Zittergruen?
Here.
Hadley?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Is there anybody here who wishes to speak about something to the council that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, consent agenda. And I usually have you read the consent agenda.
Sure. Item A, minutes of the September 7th, 2021 meeting. Item B, claims. Item C, special event application, Impact Coffee, October 2nd, 2021. Luther College class of 2012 reunion from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. Close Washington Street from Water Street to Alley, including outdoor service area. Item D, appointments to the Winishik County Solid Waste Committee. Todd Edie, thank you. City Representative Rick Bohr, alternate. Item E, Resolution 3216, setting public hearing for rezoning request, 3 Chicks Rentals LLC, Old Fox and Coon Club property from Ag 1 agricultural to C1 commercial.
I'd move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Move.
Meeting in November would be best.
And which one is that for?
Item E.
Okay.
So I will amend my motion to include that.
And the second, still seconds.
Okay, motion made by Chisel, second by Zittergruen. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Schissel,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Okay. Consider approval of submission of Historic Preservation Commission's request to add the Decorah Public Library and St. Benedict's Catholic Church to the Broadway Historic District. Mark Mugley is here to explain what that submission entails.
Yeah, I'm here on behalf of the Decorah Historic Preservation Commission, which is a state-certified, city-named 7-member commission. We think adding St. Benedict and the library to the National Register would be a very positive thing. And in this case, we can do it by expanding the boundaries of the Broadway Phelps Park District. St. Ben's is a church. There are already 5 churches in the district. The library is an iconic building. Being on the National Register does not bring any restrictions, despite the common thinking that it does. And we know that because, for example, Phelps Park is on the National Register as part of that district, and there never been, and it's a city-owned property, and there never has been any issue with that. There are some advantages aside from the recognition. There are potential for grants. There's not a huge pot of money that makes automatic grants, but there are some large grants, including, for example, the $125,000 grant that the county got recently for the courthouse. That grant program was restricted to buildings on the National Register. St. Benedict's has been very appreciative of us doing this. The Board of Trustees of the library has endorsed it. The State Historic Preservation Office has endorsed it. The mayor, before she signs the form, thought it would be prudent to have the council have an opportunity to endorse it. Open to questions.
Okay. I know we talked a little this morning about it. Travis, do you want to ask some question, please?
My understanding is, Mark, you were able to present at the library board meeting as well to get their input, and they overall endorsed entering into the Historic Preservation District. And into some preliminary research, I was trying to contact the National Historic Registry and get some questions answered as well. My understanding is that you are correct that we don't have to necessarily utilize the guidelines for preservation if the building's in the district. However, will the local commission want to be weighed in on those? That would be a question I would pose, is that if it's the city of Decorah and the library board working on a project, is there going to be objections from the local historic preservation?
Well, any time a building is named to the National Register, it has partisan supporters. It's a complicated process to get it on the National Register, and therefore people respect the designation. And so any building that is on the National Register will have people come forward and say, we wish you didn't do this. We'd prefer you did this. I won't say that our commission wouldn't do that, except we have no authority to control what the city does with its building any more than we have any authority to control what private owners do with their businesses. The only role that is legislated, you might say, is that for building renovations in the C3 district, the Historic Preservation Commission has the option to make recommendations on the changes, which then go to P&Z, are usually ignored, and then come to the city council. So there, I think it's I understand the source of the question. If the library decided that they wanted to stucco tomorrow, we would undoubtedly, as a commission, say we think this is a bad idea. But they could ignore us just as they could ignore anyone who disagreed with that.
I think I will make a comment on behalf of the P&Z and for anybody that you bring forth, and I understand fully the position that you are in as far as any authority, but I also think that it does provide an additional resource for any of the building projects or consideration in planning and zoning, but that there are other guidelines that are actually followed through our ordinances and codes that we have to abide by as well. But so I did want to make a comment in pertaining to that.
Well, I apologize for being snarky about that. We
Well, I just
we
noted
follow-
and I wanted to
we
correct it.
give recommendations based on the city
Yeah.
code, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult for us to know whether the members of P&Z weigh those very heavily.
One
I
of the
move
things,
we act support of the proposal.
I just want to ask a quick question in follow-up to what we're talking about. So just for very clear clarification, the designation does not tie our hands into having to remodel in any particular way if we choose not to.
The National Register designation does not in any way control what happens to properties. East Side School was put on the National Register, and a year later, it was demolished. And there were people upset at that, but there were no legal ramifications whatever. The reason that people think that there are controls is that there are states and cities that have their own legislation that restricts what they can do with buildings.
Right.
So the city of Portland has extremely precise rules about building renovation. Decorah does not, and in a city like Portland, the Landmark Commission has a great deal of authority in enforcing those rules. Decorah does not have those, and the National Register designation does not create any.
So what do you think the primary advantage of doing it is?
Excuse
The
me?
primary advantage, like why should we do it?
Well, I think the primary advantage is that it's an honor. It's been demonstrated clearly that historic buildings and historic districts' property values exceed the general property values in those cities. That doesn't apply, of course, to St. Ben's and the library. They don't care what the property values are. It's an honor that people recognize tourists are interested in, and in addition, secondarily, there sometimes are financial benefits to it.
I think when you're looking at grants, specific grants, having it in there is where you see the value.
So it kind of sounds like a win to me.
Yep,
I
it
mean,
does.
sort of.
Let's see, we've got a motion. I have not had a second
I'll
yet.
second.
Okay. Motion made by Luz, second by Neil. Any further discussion?
I just want to say thanks, Mark. That was really helpful and informative. And even when I vote in line with P&Z and not with your recommendation, I want you to know I always appreciate your perspective and take it seriously. Thank you.
Okay, roll call.
Luce,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Schissel.
Aye.
Motion pass. And I'll make sure and get that signature to you. Oh. Okay, let me start again. Consider construction surveying agreement with Erdman Engineering for the 2021 street improvement project. You want to get some discussion on that?
So this is essentially a staking agreement. They're not going to provide construction oversight or anything like that. That'll all be handled by staff. This is to assist staff in staking out elevation points for those specific projects. The contract does have a dollar amount that we believe to be a little on the higher end than what we anticipate in true costs. So staff would recommend approval of this agreement.
I'd make a motion to approve the survey agreement with Urban Engineering as presented.
Second.
Motion made by Hadley, seconded by Carlson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Hadley,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Schissel,
Aye.
Neal.
Aye.
Consider approval of Quandal Development Site Plan. Give
All right,
that-
so I'm going to have to pass a lot of this one
That's
off.
okay, that's okay.
With that, so Jeremy and Greg will be handling a lot of the presentation of this one. In the packet would have been a letter addressing the site plan, and there were four items of note that staff would recommend being addressed. Jeremy, can you go ahead?
Yeah, so we can just go through the staff review and some things that we noted. So I see the developers are here if you have any questions for them. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the site plan off of Highland Drive, the old KDC radio building. Just a couple things I'll go through real quickly that we noted. The street and utilities will remain private. There is a sidewalk shown that is currently on private property that we just need to work out an easement for that so that it can be available for public use. This was the very first project to go through our stormwater management ordinance. So we appreciate the developers' time and efforts working with us on the very first one. And so just to provide a little background on what that means is that for a project like this, and I'll give you some numbers just to kind of demonstrate. So we require, our stormwater ordinance requires that we look at the existing condition of the site, which in this case was a green field, literally, and we look at the 5-year storm event for that pre-developed site and assign a flow to it. So in this case, I believe it was 7.48 cubic feet per second. Then we look at the project after it's going to be developed. In this case, it's 3 buildings with 4 condos per building. Is that correct? And the streets and sidewalks and everything. And we say, okay, what's the 50-year storm event runoff from the post-developed site? And we say that what you have to do is look at that 50-year post-develop and detain everything down to the same rate of the 5-year pre-developed. So everything must be at that 7.48 or less for a 50-year storm. If that makes some sense. So point is,
Yep.
a fair amount of detention is required, and that meets our ordinance. Everything they've done here meets our ordinance. So just for example, in one of they actually have two different watersheds here. The 7.48 I mentioned is for the northeast watershed, and at the 50-year post-development, the rate at which water will leave the site is calculated at 5.84. So it's actually less than the pre-developed 5-year. So I know that if there are questions specifically on the stormwater strategies, the developer's engineer is on the call as well. Ryan Benedict with Bolton and Mink out of Ames is here to answer any questions you might have on that. In terms of some things that we would like to just get worked out, I'd call them relatively minor issues. Travis mentioned the 4 items that we were recommending approval contingent upon. One is the sidewalk that I mentioned. And the other 3 are related to the stormwater plan. There's a couple things that we just want to work out with them. An inspection and maintenance form needs to be submitted just for the long-term maintenance of the practices there, so we can ensure that they are maintaining their functionality. A little bit of curb and gutter work. We want to work with the developer on that for the street along Highland Drive. For some connectivity to where their discharge point for the stormwater basins will be onto Highland Drive. And then lastly, just that discharge location currently is shown on a sidewalk, and our code would not allow that. So I'd call them relatively minor design details we need to work through, but otherwise, from a staff perspective, they provided everything that our site plan checklist and stormwater ordinance would require.
I'd like to thank Quandals for bringing this forward. It's a great use of infill. You've shown in the recent past, that you do a good job infilling available green space and making use of it. And the stormwater work that Ryan did was, if you want to geek out, it's a great read. And I really do appreciate you going through that work, because as Randy can speak to, I know that area has had challenges in basements in the area. So going through the hoops for the stormwater overview, I know probably took a little more than what you had thought, but I appreciate you doing it and know that you're going to be building a better development, and you win my approval for that work. So thank you for that.
I just have one question that came up last night. The neighbors met with 2 developers, and they did a very, very thorough job, and I see Ron back here. I think everybody came away from that pretty impressed and confident that we are moving forward. The big question, though, is moving this much dirt and adding these structures, Ryan, how is this going to affect the springs that are coming out in the hillsides? Because I know of 2 of them that have affected some of these homes. It's not the runoff, it's the underground springs.
That's a great question. I'm not aware of soil borings on this site that told us exactly the depth of those springs, the location of them, or their flow rate. I would say that on the boundaries of the site, we are not filling. And what I would anticipate is, if during construction those springs were flowing and daylighting, we could pretty easily add some subdrain to route that spring flow through our detention ponds. And that would not have an impact on the 50-year flow, for instance. That would be treated as simply base flow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That was the one question, because I know the one neighbor, even when it's dry, the spring is still flowing and her sump pump keeps running. So that'll make her feel a little bit better. So with that, I would motion to approve the site plan.
Second.
Motion made by Chisel, seconded by Hadley. Further discussion?
Quick-
Questions?
Quick question, I want to make sure that, I mean, is this motion sort of subject to the satisfaction of,
Yeah, they'll have to work with
Yeah.
Jeremy and Ryan
I just
to
want
make
that
sure.
clarified for the record. Maybe that's what Travis was jumping in to make sure was said.
Correct, thank
Okay,
you.
I had a question about 1B in the letter. It says the city communicates to the property owner that the city won't accept ownership of the streets or utilities at any time in the future unless the property owner demonstrates the infrastructure met the city's standards and specifications at the time of construction or is reconstructed to meet the city's standards and specifications. And I'm just curious if that obliges us to receiving it if they, I just want to make sure that language doesn't oblige us to do anything in the future.
You would agree, correct? I
John?
believe the way it's written, we're under no obligation, it's actually our out that says we are not,
Because it says unless they demonstrate it.
right, then we can.
But we don't have to.
And we haven't seen any plans for that either. In my understanding, for streets, it's all private driveways, so that's not an issue. Utilities, that's a separate matter, but it's all within their private property, and we have, we'd have to see a plat, and you're not subdividing it either, so we might not even see a plat.
And I totally get that. I just want to make sure that we're not creating some sort of legal promise to accept ownership if they show us this. So as long as the lawyer says we're good, we're probably good.
Well, and these streets wouldn't meet in this development,
Right.
wouldn't meet our code. I mean, the two dead ends would have to have some kind of turnaround cul-de-sac on them, and there's not enough space to do that and
Okay.
still have the retention areas, so.
And I just, has our fire department looked at this? I mean, I just want to make sure that they've seen this and they're comfortable with response stuff, like, Jeremy, is that given that there's not turnarounds at the dead ends and stuff? I'm curious about that.
Given that it's a private drive, to my knowledge, they have not. I don't know if that's a bad idea, but it's a private drive, so they're really allowed to design it at the widths and lengths that they so desire.
Okay.
Randy, do you want to amend your motion to include the
4 points, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yep. Because there is a fire hydrant in the plat right here too, so I mean, that's,
I was more worried about truck access and turnaround, so, but,
they'll be able to get in, they'll just have to back out maybe.
well, they're good
They're good
drivers.
at that. You should see some of the places in the country they get
They can come
into.
in.
They can
And then
drive on
I know I have a laundry list on this, I'm sorry. I'm just an open invitation to the developers. I'd love to hear your thoughts on going through the stormwater, the burdens, the costs, and your experience of it. I'm curious how it would affect your decision to do development here again. That doesn't have to happen now, but please do reach out to me.
So is there one of the two that are really jumping to come up to the mic and make any comments?
We know you love talking in public.
Okay. What did you say?
Save it for the next one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I do want to echo, thank you. I do think that your use of infill and taking properties and then thinking about how to use them to meet Decor needs has been very visionary, so thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Schisel,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Zittergreen,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Booth.
Aye.
Motion pass. Consider C3 commercial design application for Art House?
Sorry, I'm gonna have Jeremy take the point on this one as well.
That's fine, thank you.
All right, so this particular project is on the west side of our house in their little green space. They're proposing a fence with some pavers and some gardens, I believe. So this application was for that project. They did receive a variance from the Board of Adjustment for increasing the height of the fence from 4 to 6 feet, which again they received. Part of this project is number 9 as it relates to the a stormwater easement that we worked with Art House to obtain to clean up some things for the location of the box culvert as well as some access to Dry Run Creek. But as far as this application and the item on the agenda, that's the project. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Only that, whatever, we talked a little bit this morning and about the close proximity to dry one in the back or the property. Is there any issue you see involved when you're talking about this measure?
Yeah, so that, and I can talk more about that with the next item, but
Okay,
what
that's
really
fine.
triggered the easement was the fact that this project will be over the top of the box culvert, even though it's on private property, and concerns with city access to potentially clean out the box culvert, and so that's what this easement will address, is we have the ability to access the property, but credit to P&Z for kind of catching that point and emphasizing the importance of making sure we had access. So.
I'll hold off on questions for that then until the next item. So I'm looking for a motion for the C3 commercial design application for our house.
I move the C3 commercial design application for Art House.
Lose the second.
Motion made by Zittergruen, seconded by Luce. Any further discussion on this piece? Hearing none, roll call.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Schissel,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Carlson.
Aye.
Motion pass. Resolution 3217, accepting a storm sewer and dry run creek maintenance easement from Art House, Inc. and Bottle Tree Properties, LLC.
Go ahead again.
All right. You get tired of hearing from me. So as I mentioned, this easement was really twofold. One, our current box culvert underneath the street actually extends onto private property. So there was a desire from both parties to have an easement for the city to have that be on private property, city infrastructure on private property. And then the second piece was really looking at an easement for city to maintain and access Dry Run Creek. And so it's been a desire of ours for a long time to improve Dry Run Creek through town, and this was, I think, our first attempt, John, correct me if I'm wrong, at an easement, an access and maintenance easement to do that. So we appreciate Art House's cooperation working with us on that. We know they do have some desire to utilize that space, so the language in the easement addresses some of those items, and I'm taking credit for this work, but it was really Tom Rhodes and John Anderson that did all the hard work. So, John, you have anything to add? Please chime in.
The only thing, the easement area is supposed to be defined by a survey plat, and that has not been completed yet, as far as I know. And the reason that is, we all knew it was going to be 38 feet, 19 feet either side of the so-called center line of the creek, but because of the way it curves and stuff, we realized that's not necessarily practical, so it's going to be shrunk in some places and expanded. So your acceptance, if you decide to accept this tonight, would be subject to that final plat being done. And I don't know if Jeremy or Tom have any update on that plat.
I think, Tom, do you have I don't know if Tom's audio is working. Tom, do you have an update on that? I know Lindsay is out of the office currently, but okay, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're working with Erdman Engineering to finalize that. They did provide a draft exhibit. If that wasn't attached as part of the background notes, we had intended that to be there and can share that certainly here soon. I'm not anticipating any significant changes to what's been developed to this point. I think the only component there is just the formal filing of that with the county.
I'd make a motion to approve Resolution 3217. I think it's a good example of public-private partnerships between the city, Bottle Tree Art House, and the fact that they're doing a brick paver area in the back, which is semi-permeable, and a dye garden, which will be bio-friendly and actually absorb water before it runs off into dry run. So I wholeheartedly support Resolution 3217,
I'll second.
subject to the plat being filed correctly, yes.
We already seconded, never mind.
Okay, the motion was made by Hadley,
I'll-
seconded by Neal, noting the amendment.
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion?
Yeah, but we should probably fix our deer problem, or we're gonna have a lot more 6-foot fence requests.
Thank you for the comment.
It's on our plans.
I know. Okay, roll call.
Hadley,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Schissel,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen.
Aye.
Very good. Okay, redistricting committee update. You know that you had seen maps previously. I'm going to ask the committee to, and different people, members of the committee are going to just talk a little about how we worked with the process. And so I'll start with John Mollers, who will give just a kind of a brief outline of how we studied it.
Has to be brief.
Well, I tell you what, you know, I can time you and then,
He hasn't talked for a while, you talk forever.
this
Go
is
for
one
it.
of the issues, I would say. But I know you can be brief and to the point, John.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically, I think there's two points I want to make. First of all, really the first decision we had to make was, do we want to stick with the current districts as closely as possible, which would then require just a little bit of tinkering to address any population changes that had taken place? Or two, would we prefer to actually go with a system that seems to fit with the guidelines that the state has established, that is being essentially as compact as possible? And so if you've seen you know what the current district looks like, you know that District 1 runs way down. And so we essentially, the first decision we made was that we really opted for the compactness. This is essentially what the guidelines call for. It seems to make sense. That's a really long district, and if neighborhoods are important, there's no way that neighborhoods are combined within that single district. So that was the main decision we had to make. The second thing then, and this really is pretty nifty the way this can work, is the way, as opposed to the way it probably worked 20 years ago or maybe even 10 years ago, when you'd have to get out a paper and you'd have all these census blocks and you'd have to draw these little pictures in here. Now you can put that all in a program, and you can move your mouse, your cursor there, and you can just literally sort of expand the area that you want that first district to be in. And I think it's fair to say, I'm assuming this is, John began it this way, began with the northwest corner of the city, because there are those, about 5 or 6 large census blocks which are the result of Luther College. So it really makes sense that you want to draw those districts first, because there's not going to be a lot of tinkering that you're going to be able to do if you do those districts last, because they're just such large census blocks. And so basically, it seems to me, the first step then was to start up in that corner and kind of expand that and get yourself a pretty compact square that would be about 1/5 of the population of Decorah. And then you're going to have to do the same thing for that second district, because that also includes some Luther College census blocks over to the east, and that runs pretty much over into to the edge of the town. And then after that, it was a matter of then creating 3 more districts that are fairly compact, and trying to identify maybe key streets or natural division areas. And that's essentially what happened. And then when that was done and the committee met and we talked a little bit about it, Jeremy and Haley then went back and did a little more tinkering, maybe moving a small census block from this side of the street to the other side of Short Street, so that you would have a little more compactness. And that's basically what ended up happening. So I would say that second step was relatively mechanical and relatively easy to come up with compact districts that were pretty good size and with your equality. And again, the only real decision we had to make was the first decision, that are we going to go for compactness or try to just fiddle around a little with the current districts? And so that's how we got to where we did.
Okay, I'm gonna, we'll let the, Lyle talk about the type of guidelines, but then also Haley and Jeremy will talk about those block movements and when you have questions on that. So Lyle, do you want to come up and talk about the guidelines that are per Iowa code when you're considering
Yes,
working with these?
Thank you. A little background on myself. I was 10 years ago on the county temporary commission on redistricting, so I had a little experience going into it. So I checked section of the Iowa Code 42.2 that defines redistricting standards, and these are pretty clear because we don't want to do what some states have done and gerrymander and load things in favor of one political party or the other. We're not going to do that here. So first of all, it's pretty clear that in doing this process, the decision makers, that is you, should not include discussion of the data related to the addresses of incumbents, political affiliation of registered voters, previous election results, or demographic information other than head count. So everything that's excluded there is what other states have used to gerrymander. So you can't do that in Iowa. You shall use population, that's the main figure. Several Supreme Court decisions, Westbury versus Sanders started the process, but one person, one vote is the key thing. So that's what we are doing, and that's what Germany has the screen up there. We've got 5 wards that are very close to equal using the census tracts. As John was talking about, we wanted compactness. I think personally what we're really talking about is communities within the community, neighborhoods. It makes a lot of sense for a neighborhood, for example, where I live on the flat, is a place that people know each other and talk and have a consensus of opinions or not. And related to that compactness then is the standard of contiguousness. So you cannot use one corner of a district and hook it up with another corner of a district that you want to get in there. That's where gerrymandering was done badly in some states. And no favoring political party, incumbent, or any minority group. Questions? Well,
Okay.
you see the product.
Yeah, thank you for your work.
Okay, then I'm going to go on to Haley and Jeremy, and maybe Haley wants to. Haley Abbey is a student up at Luther that's doing her senior paper on this. Her senior paper isn't until spring, but we're providing plenty of information for her to be able to work on that.
Yes, my research is turning out to be very hands-on, so we're starting it in the heat of the
Hey,
actual
Haley,
project.
are you comfortable taking your mask off since you have a kind of a softer voice? And if you're not, you can leave the mask on too.
All right, sounds good. That makes sense.
And
I
then
do a
just pull
soft
that over
voice.
to you just a little bit. Good, thank you.
Okay, so I was involved with Jeremy in taking these maps from John Lubke and kind of altering them just to get them a little more concise. So I'll give a little bit of background on that process. We used the GIS software, and we loaded in the maps of Decorah, the census data, and John Lubke's redistricting suggestions. And once you have all that in there, you manually have to create the districts. So the GIS software doesn't do it for you, it just does the math. So by manually pulling different census blocks into a certain district you're creating, we created these maps, or we alter these maps. And how we changed this just involved looking at how the census blocks lined up with actual roads in Decorah. So to give a little bit of background on census blocks, each census block is determined by the Census Bureau, and they can't be split, as a census block is the smallest unit of available data we have for population. As it turns out, census blocks don't actually line up with actual roads. Sometimes they line up with alleys or natural barriers, and not every road is represented by a census block. Census blocks can vary in population from 0 to hundreds, and these larger census blocks, as we've discussed, offer very little flexibility.
What is a census block? Like, what's the definition of one?
A census block is just a block of area that the Census Bureau people use to total up their population. So when they're conducting the census, the data that we get isn't actually this person lives in this house and this house. It is within this little block that we determined without your input, this many people live.
Does it stay the same every time they do the census?
Jeremy just gave you a visual aid.
Is it,
Right, but I mean, I know what they look like. I'm just curious,
Okay.
how does the census come up with, like, they're obviously not here on the ground, and do they change? So that, like, in the next census, do these census blocks stay the same, and then it's only determined how many people move in and out? Or is it the census blocks change too?
The Census Bureau doesn't get any input from us. I don't know if it's changed.
Yeah, I do know that they did change in looking at the 2010 blocks compared to the 2020. It wasn't substantial, but there were changes.
Okay.
Which made drawing the boundaries even more challenging.
How they determine this is up for question. Any other questions considering the census blocks, or can I move on?
I think, yeah, the one thing we did talk about, obviously, was the fact that we had a pandemic and we weren't able to get the accurate census taking like we had.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think that's my biggest concern. And it's not just in Decorah, and it's not a concern with this map or what we're doing.
Yeah.
I just have big concerns with the census, right? If you look across the country, it does appear that the census was not the most accurate collection of data.
No.
And I have a grave concern about how that hurts communities. That's not here, it's not what you've done. Just saying that and pointing that out, that is important, and for city governments to say.
At the Iowa League of Cities, a number of communities who raised their hands saying they didn't think it was accurate
Right.
was substantial.
So I actually wouldn't be opposed, or I would be interested in us actually making a formal statement about our concern over the census. Not that that's going to change what we're doing, but we're talking about the census right now. And I think nationwide, you're seeing some repercussions because of a poorly run census.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the committee we identified a few census blocks that we know are inaccurate. Unfortunately, legally, we cannot do anything about it. So it really is just a nationwide issue. What Jeremy and I did to work with this data was we looked at each map and tried to kind of alter each one. Our goals were to make each map as compact and concise as possible in accordance with Iowa Code 49.3, because that is the bottom line requirement, other than having equal population for each district. And to do this, we just adjusted the district boundaries to more closely follow actual roads. Plan 1 was created to be the most similar to the existing districts, which this is helpful just to see how the population of Decorah has changed over the past 10 years. It's less compact than the current map because of these population changes, and not much could be done to actually clean this up. We made a few minor changes. However, at the end of the day, this map is not very compact. It's interlocking, a little jagged. It also has the highest deviations from equal population, which is worth noting. Plan 3 is also not very compact, and it is difficult to adjust without making significant changes that end up kind of morphing it towards Plan 2, which we're suggesting. Plan 2 was created to be the most compact plan by John Lubke, and we made a few minor changes. So one change that we did was between Ward 2 and we can start with Ward 3 and Ward 1, which before it was not strictly along Short Street. It kind of wove in and out of those census blocks that Jeremy's demonstrating.
Jeremy is demonstrating that up on the screen.
And so we adjusted it to just be Short Street because that's an easily definable main road and helps to create a more compact map. The next change is between Ward 2 and Ward 3. And it has to do with kind of the way it's vertically split up. So we made the boundary between Ward 2 and Ward 3 River Street and Mechanic Street. And this is just before it was split at one point along an alleyway that wasn't an actual road. So it's just a little bit difficult to define. Finally, we changed the boundary between Ward 2 and Ward 5 to be along Clareborn Drive and Winishik Avenue. And this has to do with the strange census blocks north of Winishik Avenue. These don't necessarily represent actual streets, and there's actually houses on either side of these two census blocks that are included with the very large census block of Ward 5. So including those two blocks into Ward 2 kind of creates exclusion of these other houses on either side. So we decided to just make the boundary of Winishik Avenue to be just easily definable. Jeremy, am I missing anything? Awesome. Does anyone have any questions?
Could you, you do have the percentage of deviation noted. You want to just make any comment on that? That's on plan, on your plan where it's up where there's wood, Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yes. So out of the 3 plans, Plan 3, which is not very compact, has the lowest standard of deviation. According to Decorah law and Iowa code, this standard of deviation has to be under 1%. So every plan meets the standard of deviation. However, Plan 3 is the most ideal. However, it's not the most ideal in terms of compactness. Plan 2 is at the middle ground. Ward 2 has a decently high deviation of 0.86%, and Plan 1 has some higher deviations, especially Ward 1, which is at 8.86, and Ward 5, which is at negative 0.99. So that is basically as high or as low of a population as you can go for that. And I'd also like to draw a distinction between the Decorah code and the Iowa code. Decorah code actually does not define any sort of redistricting process. It is updated every 10 years to just define the existing boundaries. However, it does say that the districts have to line up with the precincts, which this is important because Iowa code doesn't necessarily define wards or districts for cities, but it does define what needs to be done to create precincts, and that's Iowa Code 49.3. And those guidelines are what has already been shared.
What kind of questions do the council have of that?
I'll just say, as a representative of Ward 3, I had 3 very different neighborhoods. I had West Side, the west side of downtown, and Minnow Heights. So I would say having 2 neighborhoods now is an improvement, at least for my ward, or the ward I represent currently and live in. So I would say that I think this is an improvement, at least. And I can't speak for everyone else, but.
I just thank you for your work
Yeah,
on
that
it.
too.
I know it was a slog, maybe more so than people and myself would have thought, to be able to interpret the data, compare it to code, and try to do the adjustments, the physical adjustments of the mapping. So thank you for the work on that. Are there any recommendations that you have? I know you were talking about our code and our practice and our code not reflecting a process for redistricting within the census timeframes. Are there other communities that do have local ordinances that support a process for how to handle this in the future?
I'm not sure. That'd be something I have to look into. However, if we were to define more of what this process should look like, I would support it being a very democratic process, as it affects voting and where people vote, how they vote.
Sure. Did you feel like the process went well in what you were involved in?
With what I was involved in, yes, I did appreciate the creation of a committee to really examine this data. It was made up of people with different backgrounds. I look forward to the public hearing to see what other people have to say about it, especially since this information and just the language of the Iowa Code isn't very accessible to the general population. That's something that just generally I would love to see change in my lifetime, that this information can be accessible and understandable to everyone. However, right now, committees are a necessary intermediate step to be getting this information out there.
Thank you.
Kind of piggybacking off that, Wanda, typically in the past when this does change and when we do redistrict, how is this information disseminated? Do we send a letter, or is it just published in the paper, or how does that information get out to people?
Okay. No, it'll be published in the paper. The map, the boundary descriptions, which aren't near as clear as just seeing a map for most people, but that will all be published in the paper along with the notice of public hearing. However, just for everyone's information, after talking with the Secretary of State's office this morning, we may need to reset that public hearing because they're not even going to be working on the congressional districts until the 5th of October. And I set our public hearing for the 4th. And so it was suggested we wait until they are done.
Okay.
So we may have to reset that. I'll talk to John at the county and see what he thinks about that. I don't know if there's going to be a problem with the county districts lining up with those congressional districts. We don't really anticipate that because the county has moved forward with doing theirs too. So anyway, we will know hopefully tomorrow if I'm going to have to reset that.
Let's say if we did have it on October 4th, there's a time element for how much ahead of time you have to have that data that you just talked about published.
Well, actually, that was what my call to the Secretary of State was about.
Sure.
Because I couldn't remember what the publication timeline was.
Right.
And so I called to find out for sure because I was thinking it was like between 10 and 20. But actually, there is nothing in the state code that states what that timeline needs to be. But that's how we got on this whole subject. That's how come I know that they thought we were jumping the gun a little bit with getting our boundaries set. So there is no timeline, but nonetheless, the maps and the boundaries and the public hearing notice will be in the paper before that public hearing.
I think that was extremely confusing because it appeared that we were on a time element to get done, which
So,
I'm glad we got it done when we got it done. But
given that, I would actually propose, so first of all, I want to say thank you so much to the committee. This is awesome. And I know you did work in short notice, and thank you. Given that we are changing, if we go with this plan, which I think is likely, well, at least from my perspective, if we postpone it a little bit, my understanding is that, so we're now not under any state deadline. Obviously, they're not moving fast. So I would suggest, in order not to confuse the upcoming election that's happening, which won't affect the seats, my understanding is that the election, they wouldn't have to worry about the seats now until the next series.
This will not affect this election.
Right. I would not publish a map in the paper close to our elections so that people get very confused about who they can vote for and where they vote. Like, I would not muddle this, and I think
I
it's
don't
on
know
us.
that you're going to be able to wait until
Yeah.
November. You
Well-
probably aren't going to be able to do that.
And also, actually, it has been very clear in everything we've talked about that this map is totally separate from the council for the election, for everything, even though I understand what you're saying.
I
And
get
so-
it seems very clear to us. I just know what public perception is. If we publish a map in the middle of October about new districts, that is going to mess with our election.
I guess I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Every single redistricting year, you're faced with that.
Mhm.
And,
But it
and-
usually happens earlier, right? I mean,
well,
this should have
sometimes
been
it
done in
happens
September.
earlier, but regardless of the fact that the congressional districts aren't going to be worked on until actually the 5th of October, this still has to be done by before mid-January.
Then we got plenty of time.
So, well,
I mean, that's
yeah,
the
but
thing.
the
is that
county
if
has to do theirs too.
the county can do theirs. It can pause for them too. If we do not have to have this done until mid-January, then there's no reason we have to publish a map in our paper in mid-October.
I understand what you're saying, but I think I would want clarification either from the Secretary of State or whatever as far as when we should have to have this done and how that would work versus just taking it upon ourselves to state. I understand completely what you're saying, but I also know that this districting map is totally on its own, and there should be no, whether you have an election or not, that it should be. I just need further information and clarification.
So Travis, can you find out, or Wanda from the Secretary of State,
Yeah.
when the actual deadline for both the city and the county to have this done would be?
Right, so that's to follow up with that, not just answering that with yes.
Right.
We can follow up and get confirmation 100% on that. But also, one thing I would like to get confirmation on, that Wanda had that conversation. I agree there is the potential for a wrench to be thrown in this, and then the maps have to be redrafted as a result of congressional districting. That's a possibility. So if we still move forward, hold the public hearing, but the redistricting or the congressional districts are not in conflict, I believe we've met our legal obligation of holding that public hearing and holding it sooner rather than later, getting it too close to that election. We're still, because the publication itself would happen this month yet. It would still be a month and roughly a month and a half or a little short of that out from the actual election.
So so what I'm asking is that if the county and the city do not actually have to have this information done until the middle of January,
Mhm.
I would ask we actually hold off on this until November.
Mhm.
And then we have done our election, and then we do it in November. And we're all ready to go, and we can just do the meetings.
Mhm.
And
We can work back from that deadline to
Yep.
see where our publications would fall in, council meetings to be able to hold the appropriate hearings. We can work backwards from that.
Okay.
Could I bring this back to the sort of the questions for y'all? I'll add my thanks to everyone else's for the work on the committee. A great presentation because I had a list of questions and you answered almost all of them, including like that weird thing on north of Winishik Avenue. I had no idea what was going on there, why they'd have to cross the river to see anyone else in their ward. But it makes sense to me now. I guess my other broader question, I was trying to read Iowa Code Section 42. You talked about it as incomprehensible to most Iowans, and I will second that. However, I did notice that that compactness, which they define at length in the code, is one criteria among a few, and sort of the natural and main road boundaries being another. And I guess I'm curious, when your committee met, did you all talk about how you were going to weigh? It seems to me from listening to the presentation that compactness was a really primary factor, that you kind of started from there, and then just, if other things worked, if you could have natural divisions, that'd be great. But I'm curious, was that decision made sort of as a matter of strict adherence to Iowa code, or was there a values discussion on on what, whether you weigh compactness more or following natural boundaries more. That's just a general question, because it seems like the Iowa Code has a lot of things that you're supposed to try to consider. Oh, and I'll ask a follow-up, actually, so I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, so the committee did consider compactness, and the Iowa Code lists a few other things, as you said. They must be equal in population, as close as practical, within 1% of deviation. We took that into account. Every map that John Lubke presented meets that requirement, and Jeremy and I worked closely to maintain that requirement as being met. The other definition that the Iowa Code gives is what we cannot consider, which is incumbent office holders, political affiliation of population, previous election results, and any demographic information besides head counts.
Right. I guess that was just one question. The follow-up that I had is, maybe I should have asked it when I had it in my head just now, huh? I guess I'll just take a pass on it. I might be emailing you with a question, though. Thank you.
Okay, if I can just clarify something for everybody. When you talk about the compactness of these words, if you remember 10 years ago and prior to that, the enrollment numbers at Luther were very, very different than they are today. And you had to, that's why some of the lines are the way they are, because you had to split that up in order to meet that population requirement, which is why it looks like it does today, the current one. And then we just have, tried to follow those boundary lines as much as possible without changing them any more than necessary. But those population counts in those particular census blocks have changed drastically, which they weren't. They were much different 10 years ago and prior to that.
So does
why those boundaries look the way they did.
So that is something to, I don't know that we consider or think about, but if the next census isn't done for 10 years, right, does this mean that wherever there's growth has a potential to get a ward much larger than another one, right? So if we know we're growing on, I think what you're saying is valid, right? So Ward 1 does this weird wraparound because the other two were so large that in order to accommodate, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, because you had to, like you said, we can't split a census block. So you had to have those census blocks in different wards.
Yeah, and there's no way to predict, right, how we're going to grow and where we're going to grow, but presumably if we're in a bowl, so if we only grew in one area, one ward could wind up being very large. So I will echo what I've said at many meetings. We should all just run at large, and then it won't matter.
A couple things. One is the importance of, actually with the amount of census that we've had that's been down, the importance of is the initiatives that we take on as a city to increase the population coming in so that we can grow that piece. I did check with Ben Steinis, and we need to check further from changing from a ward to at large. I believe takes a referendum, but I don't know for that for sure, but that is just one thing to consider, and there's merits and, merits and drawbacks any way you want to look at as far as that's concerned too.
And the only reason I say, had we not had a census, so let's say that Luther shrunk by 500 people. It wasn't all Luther, but Luther shrunk by 500 people. So that means that the council person representing them now represents 500 less people, and there's probably a council person who represents more than, you know what I'm saying? So in terms of thinking about how Decor works, which is different than how something on a larger scale works.
Well, one thing when you look at the numbers, you're not supposed to be looking at any group, which would be Luther.
No, I'm just
So
talking
it's
about.
just
I'm just talking about the ward that Luther is in. If that is the shrinking ward, and yet we've built a census on a 10-year plan. Again, it's just my problem with the census.
Well, and
right?
they're also
10-year population.
I think
is a big
that census blocks too cover both wards.
They do.
So,
They do.
you know, you're looking at getting the correct numbers in there. So that you don't take into consideration, you can't take into consideration per se, except for how those numbers are worked
No,
out.
I'm just giving one more plug for why we should all be at large, that's all.
Okay, what I ask is that, you know, supposedly we have the public hearing set, but I'm gonna wait to get information from both you and Wanda to determine, in consideration, to what Emily said, as far as, you know, when that should be done, and in relation to the work that's done at the county level, because I know when we talked, there was a need of some sort as far as information from the city as far as how the county works too. So we'll wait to hear back from you as far as what information you find out. But I want to thank the committee that has worked on it. It's been very informational. And Haley, I appreciate the work you do and have done, and we'll look forward to keep funneling information to you and maybe questions along the way just to support your project.
But wait, can I ask another, this is for the mayor. I mean, if we're supposed to have a meeting on the October 4th, don't we need to have a map decided on? Don't we need to make a decision?
Say that again?
Do we not decide on the map until the public hearing, or are we supposed to pick a public map and then have the hearing?
Well, if I were looking at it, you know, the direction as far as we was to come forth with a map.
Right.
If you choose not, let's say you have a public hearing and you've got it set and you've got it stated for Plan 2, then that hearing goes with that. For whatever reason that the council would choose not to do that map, you start all over again.
Got it.
And then you set the public hearing, so you're back to square one. And I think when we worked as a committee, we attempted to follow what the guidelines were that the council had set forth as well. So. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
All right, boards and commission appointments. We have an appointment for Karen Josem to the Historic Preservation Commission.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Chisel, second by
Carlson.
Carlson. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Roll call, sorry.
We'll do roll call.
Oh, shoot, I haven't.
We've never
I
done that.
haven't done that.
You've been so
I
good
was
this
so
year.
good. This year, I think I almost went 2 years without doing that.
I've actually never heard you do it.
Okay.
Schissel,
Aye.
Carlson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
All right, city manager, department head, and council reports.
I'm Travis. This is my second week, first full week here in Decorah. I do want to thank everyone, the community, staff, elected officials. This has been a very welcoming committee, not just to myself, but my family as well. And so we're really glad to be here in Decorah, and we'll get things situated, settle down a little bit, and really looking forward to my time here.
Very good. Wanda.
Very quickly, you need to get any questions to Pat Callahan, your search consultant, that you might have. He called today and just asked me to remind you.
Thank you. Anybody else at the table? You know, actually for the whole day in the department, Jeremy was the man of the
What are you
day,
saying,
I
Mayor?
think.
Yeah, I talk too much? Okay, I'll go quick. Just a couple updates on our street projects. East Main, all the underground work is complete. And so grading is starting and underway. Paving, we're expecting about 3 weeks, so that project's moving along. Pole Line Road, all the main Pavement on the bridge itself is in, the structural concrete is in, barrier rails, they're working on the approaches currently as well as some pipe work. And our asphalt overlay project probably will get underway this week. And we are also in the process of grinding stumps. So we have a contractor grinding 89 stumps in round 1 and more to come. So if you get questions on that, they got 9 done so far and several more to get done in the next 2 months.
Thank you.
Is this on? Okay, great. Dave is gone this week, so I'm stepping in for him. He wanted me just to kind of brief the council real quick. Back this last June, we had an officer that left the department that we have replaced. We made an offer to an individual by the name of Trevor Thomas, who works out at Seed Savers. He's passed everything he needs to pass, and he'll be starting next week. We've also anticipated another officer going to the sheriff's office. It wasn't supposed to be till this next March, but it's coming here this next month. So we have one more person left on a civil service list that kind of starting that process to get his MMPI and also his physical done through municipal fire and police. Also this Wednesday, we're having the city auction. So if anybody would like to bid on some clean used one owner city stuff, you can come on down. And that's at 5:30 here at City Hall.
Okay, anybody else at the department head table? Okay, please take, I don't see on my notes as far as the open house at the training center for the fire department. I was trying to think it was the 6th of October? October 6th?
Correct.
Just as a reminder of that.
I believe
please.
it's 5 to 8. Does that sound correct? Right?
Now, just make sure, I know it's posted on Facebook, but just to remind the council to be sure and partake in that, so. Okay, we got it, Russ. Okay. All right, so when we go back, when we get to Russ, he can give, yeah, he can state it.
Sweet.
Good.
We got
And what did you find? Okay, well, we got the flyer.
Yes, 5 to 8.
Thank you very much.
On the
for that.
6th.
I'm going to call it my anniversary party and
There you go. Okay, let's see, Randy.
Well, I did attend the League of Iowa Cities Conference last week. As always, it's fun to talk to other city officials and learn that we got some of the same problems and they've got problems that are different than ours, and how they solve them is always interesting. The most interesting one that I went to was Friday morning on fiber without a utility. It was very interesting, and to hear what the bond council said about using that federal money right now, and so we're gonna have to look at that a little bit more carefully to do this. But I had a long talk with the city manager from Vinton, Chris Ward, about their utility, and I might have to work my way down there someday and sit down with him.
Yeah, how it goes.
But it was a good conference, as always.
Okay, Emily.
just writing notes on the Sustainability Commission met last week. They're looking forward to having you attend in October. We talked a little bit about planning for an upcoming Decorah 2030 group, the stakeholder meeting, and I think they'll be reaching out to you
Yes.
we came up with some ideas for that particular meeting towards the end of October. And we also talked a little bit about Decorah being a project with an organization that's looking at kind of I look at it as like kind of a stars for cities, but it's not quite stars, but how do you create metrics and goals for your city in terms of sustainability, and then get some national recognition for the stuff that you're doing. So we talked about there's an organization that's been doing it for lots of cities in Minnesota, and they're interested in potentially working with Decor as a pilot. Wouldn't cost us anything. It's just looking at a lens, having us and our Sustainability Commission look through a lens that they're helping us provide. Other than that, If you haven't gotten vaccinated, I'll say it again. Get vaccinated. Thank you. That's it.
Hey, thank you, Emily. Andy?
I'm going to call a utility committee meeting after our regular scheduled council meeting October 18th. We're going to look at some, RC&D has a funding report for stormwater, so take a look at that. So if everyone who's on that committee would please put that on their calendar.
Steve?
Also attended the Iowa League of Cities, meeting with other city people and seeing what they do and how they do things and sharing ideas is always educational and even fun. The Economic Development Committee met before this meeting and talked to some partners who are looking at how to support developments, infill, and different projects that we might do together in a public-private type of partnership. So look to keep those conversations continuing.
Thank you. Steve?
I also went to the Iowa League of Cities meeting, and this was easily the most helpful conference I've ever been to. So they ran it well. It's certainly worth going to again. I guess everyone's doing their favorite thing that they learned. I actually really enjoyed learning about, I went to a conference session on creative financing for stormwater and wastewater treatment plants. So it seems like something that we might need to know a little bit more about. Learned a lot about city budget cycle, the TIF process, and just the convoluted thing that is municipal finances, just by sitting in and absorbing from these sessions. I was drinking from a fire hose a lot, but it was a lot of fun.
Ross?
I've been in my free council time, since I did not attend the conference, I had a meeting with a local solar power Decorah electric company, and discussed power purchase agreement concepts for the city. We've looked at Alliant and potential partnerships there. The lowest hanging fruit for the city of Decorah to start looking into solar is the campground, because it's an area where we could meter, and we have land up above Pulpit Rock that we could utilize for solar to take the campground off the grid. The campground's an increasing user of electricity as the RVs are not small. And it's an opportunity for us to have a public-private partnership, but also something that the city of Decorah can do. And we can't use Align as a partner because the land above Pulpit is on a different provider. But they would be able to help us with that. And I think there's support within the park board to take it off the grid. So I'm looking forward to a proposal from them and perhaps a local investor group to help us move it forward without cost to the city.
Okay. Thank you. Kurt?
This doesn't have a lot to do with, I guess, city stuff, but at Luther, we've had a number of weekends that have been fairly big. A weekend ago, we had the All-American Invitational that brought, 30-some teams and a few thousand runners and their families to the community. Last weekend was, of course, family weekend, and also we had a community day picnic. In 2 weeks, we have our homecoming, which will bring some people back that haven't been in town for over a year. We have a second group of people coming for homecoming on the 16th of October. And then we also have a commencement weekend for the class of 2020 early in November. So there are a lot of big weekends, and I hope that the hotels and motels and restaurants and other establishments are taking advantage of all of these crowds that are coming in.
Fantastic.
And thanks to Luther for the cool stickers that they brought this year for the storefronts and whatnot, so that we could show the community, or show Luther our support as well.
Okay, just a note, we won't have a work session on the 4th because the 4th Monday of this month, because Tuesday we're going to be all together and working on securing a new city clerk finance person. I also went to the conference. I enjoyed meeting with the different mayors. I did get appointed to the Mayors Association, and that basically has a listserv that tries to be able to get information to new mayors, and it's a networking device that's done online. So I really support that, as sometimes I want to know how the heck do you do something. I also went to a meeting about sustainability actions-based community development, and that featured Orange City, which I know some people in here has worked with that, but it was fascinating to look, and one of the projects they did work with and did conceptualizing was with the housing. I went to one where they talked about politically being careful about having your personal email and your council email separate, and especially if you're running for office or other, you're as a person, you're more than able to do that, but it's not tying it in with the fact of what you're doing work-wise. Let's see, what else? These are, I used the voting when I first went to take my notes. I found it very interesting about a term that came up called NIMBY, meaning not in my backyard, where people say, I'd like to have this built, but not in my backyard. I thought, well, that was interesting. I want to also, just out of respect, to acknowledge the passing of Dave Swenson this last weekend, longtime fireman, longtime attendee in the Cards, and brother to the other Swensons. I feel he's in a much better place than where he had been, as his health had declined in many of the last years. I also just want to thank the citizens of Decorah that have stepped up for the election. I don't remember a time when all of the seats have had races. It's healthy for the city, except for the mayor, and selfish. Selfishly, I appreciate the support that the city has done for me as well. I encourage any of those candidates that are running, and I know that there are some here tonight, to come to the city council, to ask questions, to be informed, so that you have an idea of what's, if you don't have any idea, or they don't have any idea of what the city council is, that they come and learn. But it'll be an exciting session. And following this meeting, we have another street committee meeting, I believe. So with that, I'll call for an adjournment.
So moved.
Okay. Thank you very much.